So
Great.
Glenn, go ahead and take it away.
All right. Well, hello, everyone. I am Glenn Ference, user experience designer and researcher, a little place out of Cleveland called Robots and Pencils. And what we really do is we consider ourselves a digital innovation agency. So we help companies innovate and essentially create what's next. So today, I want to talk about a topic that's fun, maybe a little scary, maybe even a little intimidating for some of you, and that's visual problem solving and user experience design. Now, keep in mind that although this will be primarily focused on user experience design, visual problem solving can be done by anyone at absolutely any time. So Salvador Dali, a surrealist painter, once said, "Have no fear of perfection because you'll never reach it." And I think this quote is really good to think about as I talk about visual problem solving today, because it sets us up for thinking about problem solving in a very specific way. And that's a way that frees us from perfection. I'm sure many of you have heard perfection is the enemy of good. And as you think about problem solving of any kind, it's important to remember we're not striving for perfection, not even close. We're really just striving for progress. Now, perfection tends to be one of those scary things that can keep us from speaking up in meetings with other team members. And I mean, who really wants to look like a fool in front of a room of so-called important people, right? So a skill that I believe is often overlooked, but very important to have, is the ability to brainstorm with fellow stakeholders, fellow designers on the spot. Now, remember, this isn't a skill for designers only, of course. Being able to share your screen or walk up to a whiteboard and walk others in the room through an idea is an invaluable skill regardless of your role. So we've all been there, right? Someone in the room throws out an idea and looks to you for your input. Maybe you haven't been there, but you can imagine how this feels. Now, let's be a little honest. For some of us, myself included, this isn't the most comfortable place to be in. If you're like me, you probably feel a little bit like these emojis up here on the screen, maybe unprepared, maybe have some cold sweats. My goal is to help provide you with a framework to refer to in these situations. Having a framework to rely on will help you think more clearly and ultimately will give you the most important thing, which is confidence in situations like this. So keep in mind, this isn't a replacement for formal UX process, and it really shouldn't be. It's just a starting point. It's a way to kick off a project, help folks align on a common goal. And remember, don't stress, have fun with it. So let's jump right in. Step one. This is where we always want to begin, right? We want to identify what the problem is. Now, although it's pretty clear in this image what the problem is, oftentimes in a meeting when you're sitting with stakeholders, the issue isn't so clear. So imagine this. You're in a meeting, someone immediately has a suggestion. They say, we need to create a safe messaging app that helps parents connect with their elementary school children. Okay, sounds fair enough. Now in this example, someone has already proposed a solution to a problem that we don't really know yet. And that solution is, well, we need a safe messaging app. But wait, what's the actual problem here? At this point, it's a good idea to talk to other people in the room and find out what the problem actually is. Now remember, you're not coming up with solutions yet. You're just going to get to the heart of what the real problem is. So one good way to kind of get to the heart of a problem is by asking a how might we question. Now, how might we questions are a way to frame your ideation and often used for launching brainstorms. So again, here's the solution that was proposed before. We need to create a safe messaging app that helps parents connect with their elementary school children. An example of a how might we question for this situation would be, how might we help parents stay in touch with their children? Now, we want to make sure that the how might we statement is narrow enough that we can actually pull out a problem, but not so narrow that we already know the solution. So in this example, there's a lot of ideation that can happen around parents connecting with their children. A messaging app may be one idea, but how else could a parent stay in touch with their elementary school child? And what does staying in touch even actually mean? So now that we've created a how might we statement, we need to make sure we're getting buy-in. And this is something we're going to want to do throughout the whole process. So you want to talk to the people you're collaborating with. Does this make sense? Is there anything we're missing? So after you've gotten buy-in, it's time to move on to the next step. Empathize. All right, so this would be a fantastic time to surface user research if you have any. But for our purposes here, let's imagine we don't. Oftentimes you're stepping into a meeting for the first time, you're hearing an idea, and you don't have any research to support the claims you're hearing. So what do we do now? Well, we need to try to understand who our users are and ultimately who we want to solve this problem for. So we want to make sure that everyone in the room agrees that we're working off of assumptions at this point as well. And this is absolutely key. What this is going to do is reinforce that we don't actually know who the users are. We're going to be working off of assumptions, and that it'll also set us up to conduct real user research in the future. And we'll circle back to this a little bit later. So we're talking about users, but what users do we focus on? Oftentimes products have many users, and it can be easy to get distracted and ultimately go completely off course. So typically a system will have both primary and secondary users. Now, when you're loosely ideating or brainstorming in a room with individuals, it can be helpful to focus on just the main use case. It's easy to get sidetracked with edge cases at this point, and doing so can nearly completely derail the conversation. So you'll really want to try your best to focus on who the primary users are and only talk about secondary users if they truly impact the system. You also want to include everyone in the room at this point to help determine who these users are, who the primary users are, who the secondary users are. You probably have some ideas of your own, but again, this is collaboration. You're just the main facilitator. So for example, for keeping our how might we question in mind, we can determine that our primary users are parents, right? Parents are going to be the ones who will be choosing to download the app. They'll be primarily using the app to communicate with their children. And the parents are who we ultimately want to appeal to. The secondary users in this case are children, right? Because they'll also be using the app, potentially other family members and friends. So now we have a few rudimentary personas. We understand it's parents that we're going to be working with. Now we're going to want to spend a little bit of time creating what we call an empathy map. Some of you may be familiar with this. And you can see a brief empathy map here, something that I quickly put together. So you can see this is for the parent, right? We have the 4 primary quadrants, with each quadrant helping us to better understand our user and also help everyone in the room empathize with who we're actually talking about. So we have a section for what our user says, thinks, does, and feels, all while searching for and exploring potential solutions to his or her problem. So while searching for solutions to the problem, our parent says things like, how much does it cost? And I want something reliable, right? Our parent might think things like, maybe the solution isn't the best, and I really want something awesome. I want something my kids will want to use. Our parent might also, do things like ask other parents, maybe list pros and cons of different options that are out there on the market. And of course, you're using an application with kids, right? So you have certain feelings that come along with this as well. Maybe you're a little nervous, a little overwhelmed, anxious, right? So we put these all up on the board, and it helps everyone in the room start to empathize with who we're really talking about. So we've created our empathy map. Now it's a good idea to re-review our how might we statement and make sure it's still accurate. If not, we can update this at absolutely any time. Again, remember, this is all exploration. So based on the empathy that we've begun to build up for our users, I'd say our how might we statement is pretty accurate right now, and we can confidently move on to the next step. So step 3, choose a scenario. The next thing we want to do is collaboratively choose a scenario and agree on it with everyone. So we've already talked about what the problem is. We've talked about who the users are. Now we want to talk through a specific scenario. It's important to keep in mind at this point, we'll want to choose a key part of the experience, something that is critical to the overall experience. So for our app example, we'll want to choose a key flow that users will go through regularly. Most important, again, reminder, don't forget to be collaborative here. Let others throw out ideas, write them on the whiteboard, really try and get a discussion going. And finally, you're going to want to pick a scenario that everyone agrees on, and that includes yourself. So in this example, I've come up with a quick scenario. It's the end of the school day, and Amelia needs to let her 8-year-old son, Jack, know that his dad will be picking him up. Okay, now we need to take this scenario and break it down into the specific tasks that the user will need to carry out to complete his or her goal. So Amelia will need to somehow get in touch with her son, right? And she also needs to give her son a message that his dad will be picking him up from school. So now that we have our scenario and our tasks, we want to dive a little deeper on the scenario and map it out really well. The end goal here is for us to be able to sketch out some solutions. So on to step 4, the journey map. Now, although we'd ideally have a detailed journey map that's based on research, of course, we're going to create a simple version that's based on assumptions. Again, this is a starter map, and it'll really help stimulate the conversation and bring people along for the journey. So we're going to be focusing on what I call the happy path for this journey. I'm sure many of you have heard this term before, and the idea is that we're going to focus on what would happen if everything goes correctly, everything goes perfectly. This means no edge cases, no outside the norm experiences. We're really, really focusing on the best case scenario here. So as a quick refresher, here's the scenario that we created earlier. It's the end of the school day, and Amelia needs to let her 8-year-old son, Jack, know that his dad will be picking him up. So now let's move on to the map. Okay, so here's a sample journey map, right? Because journey mapping is by far the most intensive part of the process, I'm only gonna review the structure for right now. And if you know that you'll be creating one of these ahead of time, don't hesitate to set up a digital artboard with a journey map potentially and share it ahead of time. The parts of this map, actions, emotions, and user experience are all pretty standard parts of a journey map, although you'll see this kind of flex back and forth depending on the needs. With that being said, as with nearly all artifacts in this process, it's perfectly acceptable to tailor a standard journey map to fit your situation that you're working in. So you see up at the top, we have actions. These are similar to the tasks we've identified as part of the scenario. And emotions, the next section, are very similar to thinking and feeling on the empathy map. And finally, we have user experience at the bottom. And this is all about how the user will be interacting with the product. This part is key, and it's going to help us identify the sketches and or wireframes that we'll be creating later. So let's start by filling out the action section of this journey map. As I've talked about before, the action section is very similar to the tasks that we've created earlier. So remember, our goal here is to just kind of spitball and think about what the best case scenario is for our user, the parent. How would our user react in any one of the given situations? So you can see stage 1, we have Amelia. She realizes it's the end of the school day. Stage 2, she remembers that she can't pick up her son today. Stage 3, she contacts her son. She sees that her son received the contact. She receives a response from her son, and she goes back to work, right? This is the ideal happy path that Amelia would be going through. Again, this section is going to take longer to complete than it has here, of course. I've just put these quickly down here. But remember to be collaborative. Make sure everyone has a chance to weigh in on the outcome. You're all talking about it and agreeing upon what these actions are. So step 5, emotions. So as we continue to fill out our journey map, it's important to let everyone in the room, again, know this is based on assumptions, right? It's important to reference back to the work that you and your collaborators have already done also whenever possible. Now, on the slides that you see here, the information is constrained by the slides of this presentation, but you'll likely have everything on the same board, ideally, when collaborating either remotely or in person. This will make referencing a lot easier. Also, it's a good thing to note, this is a future journey map. And journey maps can come in, different states. So you can have past state journey maps, things that happened in the past, current states, and future states, depending on your goal. So since this is something that doesn't yet exist, this would be considered a future state journey map. So back to emotions. I personally find it best to use smiley faces or emojis when conveying emotions on a journey map. We've all heard a picture's worth 1,000 words, and using emojis makes the journey map a ton more fun to look at as you're going through. So you can see emotions. We'll start with stage 1. Realizes it's the end of the school day. Okay, remember she can't pick up her son today. A little bit of shock there. She forgot. Okay, she contacts her son. She's making some progress towards her goal. She sees that her son received the contact, even better. Now she receives a response from her son, even better. Now she's actually making progress on her goal and getting to the end of it, and she goes back to work happy. So as you're creating these artifacts, you're likely drawing on a whiteboard or potentially creating it digitally with several other participants. And again, I want to reiterate, it's not going to be perfect. Text won't be aligned. Images might look funny, and this is all okay. It's all part of the process. Also, nothing in this journey map or any other part of the process is fixed. As you go through and you create these artifacts, it can always be changed or edited. Okay, last but certainly not least, we need to fill out the user experience portion of our map. So we need to think about how we can meet our customers' needs, considering the stages, the context, and emotions that we've already set forth in the journey map up to this point. So as we move through each section, we want to lay out the experience, what the experience will look like at a higher level. And this is going to directly influence the sketches that we'll be creating in the final step of our process. So step one, realizes it's the end of the school day, a little bit of concern. Let's imagine she receives a push notification reminder that her son is about to get out of school. Step two, remember she can't pick up her son today. Okay, she opens this app on her iPhone. Now at this point, we're already going down the path of an app. We can imagine that we've collaboratively talked about this with everyone in the room, and this is our happy path. So step three, she sends her son a message. Step four, she receives a notification that her son read the message, something like a read receipt. Step five, she reads the message from her son. Step six, she closes the app. So you can see we're starting to really convey a sense of what this experience will be like, and it's really starting to give us a sense of what those sketches are going to be like and how we can move forward in this process. All right, so on to the fun part, sketching. Now we get to take everything we've created up to this point and roughly sketch out the experience and what it'll look like. So as you can see here, I've already gone through and sketched out this experience. The sketching or wireframing portion, whatever you prefer, can also be a little time consuming. And I think it's important to note it doesn't have to be done in front of everyone, right? It's perfectly acceptable to let everyone know that now that we've all collaborated on the experience, you're going to go back and you're going to start exploring everything in a more visual way. This part is totally up to you. If you're comfortable, feel free to do this all on a whiteboard in front of everyone. But again, this is your call. So these can be very rough. You can see my sketches here are pretty rough. And this is the part of the process where you can step up and take a little bit more control. If you're going up to the whiteboard, you can step up and do that part. If you are a UX designer, creating sketches, wireframes, UI, it's your specialty after all. So at this point, you already have your journey map to refer back to, and you should stick as close to it as possible. And of course, as much as it makes sense, right? If you're sketching out an experience and something totally doesn't work, it's okay to change it up. And please remember that you're absolutely going to make mistakes as you sketch. I made mistakes here. And if you're going to do this in front of people, you're going to make mistakes. You're going to mess up. You're going to erase things, say something stupid. It's all part of the process. And have confidence, right? You're the one sketching. Just roll with it. Bringing this all together, we want to make sure we tie up any loose ends, make sure everyone is on the same page at the end. So as you can see here, I have some questions and assumptions. These are some final wrap-up items to talk about with the group. So if you decided to go off on your own and do the sketches, you can send those sketches along with maybe some of this wrap-up information. If you're doing it in real time, you can, of course, do this as a group as well. So for questions, how often do parents want to contact their children? We don't really know that. And what do parents want to message their children about, right? So for our assumptions, we're assuming that parents want to contact their children directly, that children are motivated to respond to their parents, and that children don't need any outside motivators to use the app, which is also a pretty big assumption. So these assumptions are also really important, as I've mentioned throughout the process. This is your chance to go back and make sure that the group see if they want to turn these assumptions into research facts, right? This is your opportunity to actually conduct some of this user research. So again, for this step, customize it. You want to make sure this fits your scenario. And that's it. Thanks for coming along on the journey with me. I hope everyone learned something from this. It's been a lot of fun going through it with everyone. So with that, let's move on to any questions anyone might have.
All right, we've got a couple of questions in the thread, but they're both from Kermit. So Kermit, do you want to just ask your questions?
Yes, definitely. Hello, Glenn. Thanks so much. I'm taking a look at my questions now. So yeah, it was really interesting. So what if you can't get buy-in for the most optimal solution, and especially if maybe the group's divided between solutions and you as UX designer have a feeling which one is most optimal?
Right. I think this is something that can happen quite frequently, especially depending on the players in the room. But a good thing to think about, if you know that you're stepping into this meeting and you know that you're going to be discussing a solution, start to think about reasons why you might go down a certain path. I tend to rely on heuristics a lot, right? If I know that I prefer one solution over another, I really try to stay away from my own assumptions, and I try to rely on something that has been researched and tested. So heuristics are a great thing to kind of rely on and give as reasons for either changing an experience or even creating a new experience. Also, look at what else is out there in the market if you have the opportunity to do this. You know, it's always good to kind of stick to patterns that exist and only really reinvent the wheel if you really need to. So, you know, that's one way. Of course, this is also collaborative. So this is something that, although you're going to be the ultimate designer who's going to go back and design the interface, agreeing on what the steps are throughout the process, you know, the emotions that the user is going to have, and ultimately what that final user experience is going to look like is going to be a collaborative process. So that's something that you're just going to have to kind of take in stride. And as you move forward with the designs, you know, just make sure you have backing for everything that you're deciding along the way. Also, if you really can't get buy-in, this is another good opportunity to suggest doing some real user research, right? That's always something you can rely on. So keep that in mind.
Thank you so much. And my second question, it's similar with a specific focus on management, is how do you deal with management, general higher ups, jumping to solutions before you and the team have gone through this whole process?
Well, I think solutioning is one of those things that tends to happen, you know, at the very beginning, right? We always have somebody jumping in and coming up with a solution. And what I try to do, and kind of what I'm suggesting in this process, is to step back and ask, what is the problem, right? We always want to have these solutions. And as the UX designer in the room, it's okay to question these things. It's okay to say, what problem are we trying to solve? And once you get that out there and you can all agree on a problem that you're solving, then you can start to step through, maybe walk up to a whiteboard and start to walk through a process like this to ideate around that problem. Now, you don't have to completely dismiss the person, right, and upset them, but stepping back and getting the problem would be a good way to start.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Thanks, Kermit. Are there any other questions from anyone else? I'm going to open it up to the group here. Go ahead and unmute yourself if you have a question.
Yeah, I would. So when you're coming up with your assumptions, when do you kind of need to maybe further validate those assumptions to become, you talked about user research facts, like,
yeah.
So yeah, if you could speak more about that.
So I think it's important, I said this multiple times throughout the presentation, it's important to constantly reiterate that you're working off of assumptions, right? And you're never fully confident in your ultimate solution. So at the end of the presentation, or at the end of the thing you're working through, if you're working through a map like this, you know, if you're working through wireframes on a whiteboard, that's a great time to reiterate. Remember, guys, this is based on assumptions. It's a good idea if we can validate this and make sure that it truly resonates with our user base. Right. And at least in my experience, a lot of times reiterating that you're working off of assumptions is enough to kind of clue in people to say, you know what, maybe that's not the best idea. We know some stuff, but we want to be 100% confident in this solution. So let's do some user research of some sort.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Sure.
Other questions? We've got plenty of time. If you'd prefer to post one in the channel in Slack, in the brown bag channel, I have a question thread there if you're not one who wants to unmic yourself or remic yourself, but we've got time to work with Glenn and get some questions answered.
Excuse me. I have a question. Hi, Glenn. I'm Olu, UX design student here also. Thanks for the talk. Yeah, so I have a question. How do we go about when we plan to work on a refactoring project? Like, okay, I've seen a portal. Some portals are very bad, and I feel I want to take it up as my personal challenge, to redesign and refactor everything. So how do I go about the planning? Because I know most of the links on those portals are what has already been done by the company. So mind you, I'm doing it separately as a project on my own, then probably present at the end of the day. So how do you feel one can go about such projects?
I think, going through it, if it's possible for you to, even set up a small meeting with a few key stakeholders and just suggest that, hey, I'm doing something on my own. I understand that this isn't necessarily a company initiative right now, but can you help clarify a couple things for me, right? Maybe just ask a couple questions. And if you can get them sitting in a room, that's a fantastic opportunity to start to surface some of these problems that exist, right? These may be things that are just completely off their radar. At least in my experience, that's what I've come across a lot. I've gone off to do some, UX projects on my own. I had some spare time, and surfacing some of these problems to key stakeholders, I've seen, can just turn on a light bulb, and even walking through a quick ideation session, kind of something like I've showed here can really help to key them in and start to think about, wow, there actually might be a good way to solve this problem,
Okay. All right. So what about when we don't have the chance to speak with the owners? Probably I want to work on it as a portfolio.
With any stakeholders at all?
Yes. So how do I go about that? Like, probably I just feel, this needs a redesign, and I just want to work on it as a portfolio project for myself. So once I'm done, then I can get back to them and tell them, look what I've done, what I
Right.
gave you.
Do you have any opportunity to talk to any users of the system?
I don't think so. I will.
So that would be one way, right? Getting in touch with some users to make sure that you're validating your ideas. If you can do this, again, that's another one of those light bulb moments that I've seen. It's like, look, I've actually talked to people, and this is the feedback I'm getting. This is pretty serious feedback. They're saying these things about the difficulty of using your portal. So consider seeing if you can talk to anyone who uses it. If you can't talk to someone who actually uses the system, have someone use the system. Have someone that could be a potential user walk through the system. And this will not only help make your designs better, but it'll also give you some credibility if you get the chance to pass this off to someone who can make a decision.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, that kind of jogged my memory on within your specific company, Glenn.
Mm-hmm.
When your company approaches another company, how do you all educate that company about what design is? Because I ask because a lot of even developers or people not familiar think design is it's like painting. It's like digital painting. It's just add colors here and then you're done.
Right. Well, I think one of our main ways to kind of educate people in a company about what design is by starting with a research project. We typically tend to start with something like 8 to 12 week research project, and these are usually pretty broad. And really, it's just to find out not only who their users are, but what are they actually doing. And these tend to be not targeted research projects. So we're not targeting one specific thing or one specific app they use, but we want to know more about them. How do they work? What do they do every day? What shortcuts are they taking outside of their normal applications that nobody is even aware of, right? And if we can have the opportunity to do this research, come back and show them all of these things we've discovered, and even potentially help them lay out a map for the next 6 to 12 months of how they could improve their system, only then do we come in and start saying, okay, now that we have this information, let us show you how you can go about creating the things you need to make a better application. So right then, we've already created an opening for us to talk about design in a way that's going to be super impactful to them, as opposed to jumping in on the back end when there's already a project and they just want some visuals. I found personally that anytime I can do any kind of user research, bring that back and show people, helps me 100 times over.
Would you personally or your company do this before you even start speaking to the company you're working with itself, or would you already engage in like a contract and then do this process afterwards?
So most likely, if it's going to be a giant research project like that, we're going to need access to certain user types. So more than likely, we'll already have a contract in place. Now, there has been times when we do not have a contract in place, or we're pitching something. And what we do is we talk to users of similar applications or potential users and dive in on their process. What are they doing? What are they interested in? What are they looking for? And a lot of times this information can be at least valid enough to make a pretty solid pitch and say, here's some stuff we know here's how I think you might be able to really impact your business.
Thank you.
Awesome. Any other questions? We're going to let some uncomfortable silence reign for just a couple of minutes. See if anyone else has something they'd like to ask. Are you open to any questions, Glenn, about UX?
Absolutely.
Oh, okay, Glenn. I have a question that's kind of a follow up to my previous one about you specifically. Do you happen to consult or do contract work on the side?
I've done a couple projects in my past on the side. Right now, my main side gig is mentorship. I do mentorship on the side, so I do a little bit of work on the side.
Okay, very cool. When you've done the work in the past, how did you find your clients, especially early on?
Yeah. So I know this answer might be a little cliche. It tends to be what everyone says, but it's very true. I got it through knowing people and through talking to people. So when I was first looking to land a UX job, what I did was I started volunteering at local UX organizations. UXPA in Columbus, Ohio was one place that I went, and I just said, I want to volunteer. I want to do anything that will help, right? And I got to meet the director of an ad agency, Moxie at the time, who basically just gave me an internship because I got to know her and tell her about my story, tell her where I was coming from and what I was interested in. And surely that's an intimidating time if you haven't been in the field and you don't know anybody, but doing something as simple as volunteering at some local events, UX events, even above and beyond just attending, you get to know so many people and learn about so many opportunities. It was really invaluable for me.
Thank you.
I'm going to do one last call for questions. All right. Thanks, Glenn. We really appreciate the message you shared with us today. It's good thoughts, and we really appreciate your time.
Yeah. Thank you for the opportunity, and thanks for the questions, everyone.
Of course.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, we will close down the meeting now, but thanks again, Glenn, and we'll talk to you later.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.